To come up and please lead us in the invocation.
Let us be in prayer. Gracious and eternal God of all, we seek your guiding presence in our midst this evening as we take time to remember the Holocaust and all those who perished for no reason other than being different from those who had power. It is a painful experience to remember, and so we need your comforting hand to hold us during this time. Help us as we remember not only 6 million Jewish people who died, but countless others as well who were also different, who also died. As we remember the horrible deaths, may we focus our attention today on respect for the human dignity of all people and to work together to prevent such horrors from ever happening again. Bless our time together this evening, and bless those who make presentations, and bless those who are here to listen. Amen.
Be
Thank you, Bruce. Bruce Battler is a lifelong member of Temple Hesed Abraham. The music arrangement entitled Ani Maamis, a song of the Holocaust, was written by Eli Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor. In English, it is titled I Believe. I'd like to welcome you to our observance of the Holocaust Remembrance Day. My name is Jerry Greenstein, and I'm the president of the Men's Club of Temple Hesed Abraham. Our synagogue is located on Hall Avenue around the corner from the 3rd Street Plaza. We have 32 family units and have been at our present location since 1937. Our Sabbath falls Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. Services are on Friday evenings at 7:30 p.m. Rabbi Dr. Alan Podette of Williamsville, New York, one of our guest speakers this evening, has been our rabbi since 1990. Rabbi, would you please stand? Thank you. Before I introduce the president of our synagogue, I'd like to thank a number of people and individuals for their assistance in making this program possible. Joshua Stafford is a 10th grade student at Jamestown High School. He was asked by his English teacher, as an assignment, to respond in a personal way to the Holocaust. Joshua composed a symphony, which he played on the organ, portraying a journey of the Jews. Joshua shared a tape of the symphony with us this evening, which was the organ music being played as we were having dinner this evening. I'd like to thank the Robert H. Jackson Center, who's been gracious in letting us pop in any time to prepare for this program. Thank you to the Garden of Eden for the lovely flower arrangements on the dinner tables this evening. Also to Flowers by Denny, who donated the chandelier or the candelabra for tonight's festivities. Catering by Christie, who put on a delicious meal for us. Thanks to Bob Terryberry of Terryberry Productions, who gave us many, many helpful ideas. Eleanor Quilliam and June Swanson, who worked diligently at the ticket table this evening, and all of the participants in tonight's program. A sincere thank you to all of you. Now I'd like to introduce the president of Temple Hesed Abraham, Joseph Gerstel, who will serve as Master of Ceremonies this evening.
I would like to add one more thank you to Debbie Greenstein, whose labor of love brought all of this together. Thank you, Debbie. At this time, I would ask that everyone stand for the singing of our national anthem, sung by Leah Gerstel. On behalf of all the congregants of Temple Hesed Abraham, I thank you for coming this evening. We are gathered here this evening at the Robert H. Jackson Center to observe the Holocaust Day of Remembrance. World War II ended in 1945. 14 years later, the Israeli parliament, also known as the Knesset, established a day of remembrance to remember the 6 million Jews slaughtered in the Nazi camps. This National Day of Remembrance falls on the 27th day of Nisan on the Jewish calendar, which is tomorrow, April 18th. The Jackson Center is a very appropriate setting for this observance. A memorial has been established in the honor of the man who gave his heart to the service of his country, Justice Robert H. Jackson. Justice Jackson was the Chief of Counsel for the United States in the prosecution of the Axis war criminals at the close of World War II. A native of Jamestown, Justice Jackson was an outstanding statesman with an uncompromising commitment to humanity and the fight for victory over evil. It is with deep respect and gratitude that we gather in this living institution tonight to heighten the consciousness of all who enter it. This is a solemn occasion, but we are also joyful for the pleasure of having as one of our guests this evening a survivor of the Holocaust, Mr. Fred Friedman. Why do we seek to remember such a painful period in history? The short answer is, if 6 million people can be annihilated simply because of who they were, then anything is and will be possible unless we commit ourselves and our country to teach what happened. How can it be possible that one man could dominate part of Europe from 1933 to 1945? We must assure that the future of children yet unborn will be safe from the tyranny which swept Europe. May the victims of the Holocaust rest in peace in the knowledge that here, in this room tonight, we commence the sacred task of remembrance and teaching. Etched on the front of the National Archives are the words, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Let all of us continue to work together to create a world in which hatred and prejudice and threat of violence will only be a memory. Only then will we have constructed a true memorial to those millions who perished. We therefore must remember the Holocaust, now and forever. We undertake to remember not only a terrible act of barbarism, but the triumph of the human spirit." I would like to introduce a guest this evening, the Honorable Mayor Sam Teresi and his wife Becky, who are here as our guests. We are certainly grateful that Mayor Teresi is with us on this solemn occasion to issue a proclamation on the Day of Remembrance. At this time, I would ask that Mayor and our Rabbi, Rabbi Podet, if you would please come forward.
Thank you, Joe. And on behalf of all the residents of the city of Jamestown, I want to thank the family members of the temple for organizing this Day of Remembrance celebration. What you are doing here today is truly important, not only for those of us that are here today, but more importantly for future generations. If you'll indulge me for just a minute, I'd like to share a story with you before I offer this proclamation. Many of you that know me and have known me for some time know that my thirst for public service came from my mother. And I could sit around the kitchen all day listening to my mother tell stories of, she was a history shark, tell stories particularly of the World War II era in which she grew up, in the Great Depression era of our national history. My mother had an opportunity to tell me a story before she passed on 9 years ago that I was so grateful that I had the opportunity to hear. She shared a story of World War II, a local family story of my grandmother, strong woman, about 4'8", 98 pounds, who made a deal with God, I would imagine like many American mothers did during the World War II era. that if God brought her 4 boys home safely from the European theater, that she, for a period of 10 years, would hold a St. Joseph's Day dinner and baked goods sale in her home and donate all of the proceeds to the local St. Vincent de Paul Society to help the poor. My mother told me that that deal was kept on both ends. My 4 uncles made it back. But my mother also shared for me a postscript to that story. One of my uncles, who my mother and her sisters had a tough time getting along with, particularly after he came home from the European theater, in a conversation with my grandmother, it all changed. My grandmother one day ushered my mother and her sisters into the bedroom and opened up a little box in the dresser drawer. And in it were some black and white photographs of a liberated Nazi concentration camp. She said, God upheld his end of the bargain. He sent our 4 boys home. But your one brother is having a little bit more difficult time coming back as quickly as the others. The Holocaust had victims in a lot of ways. And even people here on the home front experienced the pain and still are experiencing the pain. And that's why it's important to continue to share with young people. And that's the importance of this event today. And on behalf of the 32,000 residents of the city of Jamestown, I'd like to offer this proclamation. Whereas from 1933 to 1945, it has been documented that more than 6 million people of the Jewish faith were murdered in the Nazi Holocaust as part of a systematic program of genocide, and millions of other people perished as victims of Nazism. And whereas we, the people of the city of Jamestown, should always remember the atrocities committed by the Nazis so that such horrors may never be repeated. And whereas we should continually rededicate ourselves to the principles of equality and justice for all people, remain eternally vigilant against all tyranny, and recognize that bigotry provides a breeding ground for tyranny to flourish. And whereas April 18th has been designated as a day of remembrance of Holocaust victims, known internationally as Yom HaShoah, now therefore I, Samuel Teresi, Mayor of the great city of Jamestown, do hereby proclaim Sunday, April 18th, 2004, as Holocaust Victims Remembrance Day in the city of Jamestown, and call upon all of our residents to never forget the horrors of this dark period in human history, and to continue the fight against prejudice, inhumanity, through education, vigilance, and where absolutely necessary, resistance. And witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the great city of Jamestown to be affixed this 17th day of April of the year 2004. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor Teresi. The Robert H. Jackson Center was built in 1858. It was the home of the Alonzo Kent family. The auditorium in which we now sit was once a horse stable for the Kent family. President Ulysses S. Grant dined at the Jackson Center in 1875 while en route to Chautauqua Institution for a speaking engagement. The Scottish Rite Masonic bodies bought the mansion in 1917. In 2001, the title of the property passed to the Robert H. Jackson Center. Following tonight's program, you are welcome to tour the center, and there will be coffee and desserts served in the downstairs dining room. Our first guest speaker this evening is Greg Peterson, president of the Robert H. Jackson Center. On January 16th of this year, Greg traveled to Nuremberg, Germany, with John Barrett and Elizabeth Lene Fellow to the Jackson Center, and Warren Erickson, a professor and attorney in Jamestown. They spent 4 days traveling to various sites in and around Nuremberg. Greg will now tell us something about that trip.
Congratulations. Congratulations to the Temple Hesed Abraham for taking the time, the opportunity, and to reminding all of us about something very important, this remembrance that we will never forget. And this certainly was a concept which was driven home to me just this past January when we went to Nuremberg. As Joe mentioned, I am the president of the Robert H. Jackson Center, a center which is designed to preserve the legacy of Justice Robert Jackson. What is the legacy of Justice Robert Jackson? A man who was born in 1892 in Spring Creek Township, Pennsylvania. And if you don't know where that is, go to the Deerhead Inn down in Spring Creek, that's where it's at. Who at age 5 came to Frewsburg, New York, and there he stayed through his high school years. Came to Jamestown, did a postgraduate year, never went to college. I'll repeat that, never went to college. Went to 1 year of Albany Law School, never graduated. Came back, read for the law, and at the earliest age possible, took the bar exam and passed it. He practiced law in Jamestown for 20 years. He represented some folks that you now know as Key Bank, Altel, National Fuel, among others. He represented the full spectrum from labor union individuals, up to corporations. During this period of time while he was here, Jackson was very much a staunch Democrat, one of the few Democrats in Chautauqua County, one of the very few lawyers, Fred, Democrats in Chautauqua County. And as a result, while at Albany, he was curious about what was going on at state government. He was introduced to a Democratic assemblyman from Dutchess County named Franklin Roosevelt, and through that process developed a relationship. As Roosevelt's star rose, so did Jackson's, and in 1934 became a member of what we now know as the Internal Revenue Service. He was a trial counsel, took on a guy named Mellon, was successful. If you ever go down to Washington and see the portrait gallery with big sign that says, donated by the beneficence of Andrew Mellon, it was really given to him as a result of a settlement of a tax fraud case, which Jackson prosecuted. Another whole story. He became Assistant Attorney General, Solicitor General, where one of the foremost Jewish justices of all time, Louis Brandeis, allowed us how that Justice Jackson should be Solicitor General for life because of his articulate use of the King's English. He then became Attorney General, and while as Attorney General, he was involved in writing the opinion which justified the Lend-Lease for President Roosevelt. 1941, he became selected by President Roosevelt to become a Justice of the Supreme Court. Not bad for a guy who never went to college and only went to 1 year of law school. Pretty proud moment. And he stayed on the Supreme Court right through his death in 1954, and in 1954 he died, and the Supreme Court of the United States, for what we believe to be the only time ever in the history of the Supreme Court, in mass, came to Jamestown to celebrate his life and to attend the funeral at St. Luke's. Chief Justice Earl Warren and all, Hugo Black, Felix Frankfurter, all those individuals were here to talk about Justice Jackson. However, the piece which we're here to talk about and the part of the biography of Justice Jackson, which he wrote was his most prominent part of his life, was a period of time which Joe had already introduced as that time where he was the chief American prosecutor at the Nuremberg trial. Not only was he that, but he was also the guy who was individually responsible for coordinating, co-opting, convincing the Allies that there ought to be a trial which would demonstrate once and for all that, in fact, the atrocities that occurred in Germany. After the end of World War I, and part of the Versailles Treaty, the Germans were supposed to have their own international war crimes trial. It failed. This time, and for the first time in the history of mankind, the United States, Britain, France, and Russia joined what we now know as the London Agreement to set up a protocol for a trial which would put on record, a trial which would permit the defendants to have counsel, a trial which would hopefully set forth a prototype for years to come. The signator on the London Agreement, if you go into the National Archives of the 4 countries, the signator for the United States of America, Robert H. Jackson. Again, not bad for a guy who never went to college, 1 year of law school, and here from little old Jamestown, New York. To be honest with you, these are facts that even I had no idea about until we really got into this. Justice Jackson felt very strongly about Nuremberg. And in fact, when we got started here at the Jackson Center less than 3 years ago, one of our first guests here, a gentleman by the name of Michael Berenbaum. Michael Berenbaum wrote a book entitled Witness to the Holocaust. Michael Berenbaum was the curator of the Holocaust Museum. Michael Berenbaum was a speaker at Chautauqua. It's a long baseball story, but I befriended him because he's a Brooklyn Dodger fan. It's another story too. But through baseball, he came down here, he checked us out. And we interviewed Michael for 2 hours because he's currently the executive director of the Shoah Foundation in Los Angeles, which Steven Spielberg funded. He came in here and I asked him what it meant to the remembrance, the Holocaust. What does Justice Jackson mean to all that? He said, Justice Jackson, his desire, and believe me, he was under a lot of criticism to leave the Supreme Court, but his willingness to step down from the Supreme Court to take on the case, which would in fact document for all time the horrors of the Holocaust, was something that he, for one, and the Jewish faith too, will never forget, because that added immediate credibility. It set also a template for guys like Justice Richard Goldstone, who most recently did the same thing in South Africa under the when they had hearings there. And it was Michael Berenbaum who went on to say that what we're doing here is something which he would support, not only encouraged us, and we've been in close contact with him, but he also turned me to the book, and within his book he had certain remembrances of the Holocaust. And since the Robert Jackson Center is really designed to preserve the legacy of Justice Jackson, it's important, especially today, to stop and see what that legacy was in the form of the Nuremberg trial. I'm going to read the excerpts from the opening statement of the prosecution. And I'll talk a little bit about it, but I'm also going to change my format I had a video, but I frankly can't wait to hear Fred Friedman, so I'm going to do a little bit something different. But these words that he gave at the opening of the prosecution at the first Nuremberg trial, November 21st, 1945. Justice Jackson, may it please your honors, the privilege of opening the first trial in history for crime against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been calculated, so malignant and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. that four great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is one of the most significant tributes that power ever has paid to reason. This opening paragraph has been used frequently through trials which we have currently going on at The Hague, trials in Rwanda, and it's that statement, that prototype by Justice Robert Jackson. Again, guy never went to college, 1 year of law school, Jamestown guy. It ripples today. He went on. The opening statement lasted for about 3 hours. And it was written up by a variety of national New York Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, etc., as really one of the foremost pieces of English oratory probably ever. And it's been used often in forensic courses and other law courses. But what's he say about crimes against the Jews? The most savage and numerous crimes planned and committed by the Nazis were those against the Jews. These in Germany in 1933 numbered about 500,000. That was just in Germany. In the aggregate, they had made for themselves positions which excited envy and had accumulated properties which excited the avarice of the Nazis. They were few enough to be helpless and numerous enough to be held up as a menace. Let there be no misunderstanding about the charge of persecuting Jews. What we charge against these defendants is not those arrogances and pretensions which frequently accompany the intermingling of different peoples and which are likely, despite the honest efforts of government, to produce regrettable crimes and convulsions. It is my purpose to show a plan and a design to which all Nazis were fanatically committed to annihilate all Jewish people. These crimes were organized and promoted by the party leadership, executed and protected by the Nazi officials, as we shall convince you by written orders of the secret state police itself. And it goes on from there. Justice Jackson, when he returned from Nuremberg, reflected back on that part of his life as one which he felt was the most meaningful to him, as I mentioned earlier. We have had at the Jackson Center, we've been blessed and privileged to have at the Jackson Center these past 3 years, prosecutors who were with Justice Jackson at Nuremberg. Needless to say, they're in their 80s, some in their 90s. They've all come here. Nobody ever receives or accepts, though we offer, honorariums. They come here to tip the hat to Justice Robert Jackson. What is the message? The message is that the Nuremberg trial, which today is still argued about the variety of the nuances of it, but one thing they're all agreed upon, that the evidence and the decision that was made to provide the evidence of the documentation of the Holocaust will never be denied. Though there are attempts, as you know, of deniers of the Holocaust, the fact of the Nuremberg trial, the evidence was presented. All of the defendants who were there all had their attorneys, their opportunities to exclude the evidence. Not one piece of evidence was excluded. So it's there for all time to prove the existence of the Holocaust of which we remember here today. We've even had, most recently, Bud Schulberg. Bud Schulberg, who an Academy Award-winning film screenwriter for On the Waterfront, but he was involved in the documentation, the creation of the movies which were shown at the Nuremberg trial. He was riveting. 90 years old, and he had to find, edit, present to the Nuremberg trial the movies which probably the most poignant parts of it. again, another one of those individuals who came here to pay respect to Justice Jackson, and to also be sure that that piece of legal history became something which will never be forgotten. Again, a wonderful thing, a wonderful legacy to a guy who is from Jamestown, New York, who never went to college, never graduated from law school. I'm going to stop now. Joe has invited everyone to take a tour of the Jackson Center afterwards. We have some folks from the Jackson Center who will be around to certainly answer questions, and I know some of you may have been looking forward to a 10-minute piece on Nuremberg video, but I'm going to stop. I'll show it later for anybody who wants to watch it, because I can't wait to listen to our next speaker. Thank you.
Our honored guest this evening, Mr. Fred Friedman, a resident of Clarence, New York, survivor of the Holocaust, here this evening with his wife, Faye. They have 3 sons, all of whom are attorneys. Mr. Friedman, it's a pleasure to have you with us this evening.
I'll stand for a while. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and a special thank you to the presenters today, members of the clergy, Mayor Teresi with a very inspiring proclamation, President Peterson with a wonderful explanation of the life of Jackson, which is an inspiration to anyone here. And also want to thank the Greensteins for their hospitality and invitation, and President of the congregation. My connections with Chautauqua and Jamestown go back quite a bit. In an earlier life, I worked for the New York State Department of Social Services, and both the Chautauqua County Social Service and the City of Jamestown Service were one of the 7 counties that I worked with. Since then, I got involved, or after my retirement, I got involved with SCORE, Service Corps of Retired Executives, and we had a sub-chapter in Jamestown, which developed into a full-scale chapter and now represents Chautauqua and Cattaraugus County. In addition to this, one of my activities now is I'm the Austrian consul for the western part of New York State. And that's a good time to tell you that my remarks are personal, and I'm not here to speak on behalf of the government. Now, back to 1930s. I lived in Salzburg, a city right on the border of Germany. In fact, it was a 2-mile walk to cross into German territory, which we did quite often. The Anschluss, or annexation, of March 1938 was a big surprise and was very sudden. We thought Austria was safe. Austria had a mutual defense treaty with Italy, and the last moment, Mussolini dropped his alliance with Austria and supported Hitler. At first few weeks, we didn't see too many changes. Or I should describe the invasion of the Germans. From my window, I could see the troops coming across the bridge, thousands of them coming, big trucks, steady flow of airplanes overhead, and it was quite intimidating. I could tell my parents were very concerned. But the first time I knew something is seriously changing in my life is when the Nazis announced that Jewish children are not allowed to attend school. We weren't allowed to go to public swimming pools, parks, etc., etc. Near our house, there was a Catholic order of nuns, and they secretly took in 2 Jewish girls, my younger sister and the daughter of the rabbi. These nuns welcomed the girls with open arms, and also the kids in the class were very nice to them, and at no time did the nuns ever try to impose or suggest their religion on the 2 Jewish children. Now, I want to say I'm one of the few very lucky ones, extremely lucky ones, because a few people were of great help to my family. The first one I want to mention is a Christian man from Basel, Switzerland. His name was Albert Falk. He was a lumber wholesaler, just like my father, and he has known my father probably 10, 15 years at the time of the Anschluss. The first thing he did for my father, somehow he got him out of prison. Then he arranged for my father to get a visa to leave Nazi-occupied Austria. And the visa was for one purpose only. It was supposed to be a business trip. And my father was supposed to travel all over Europe and collect the accounts receivable for his business, and then bring it all back together with himself. Well, he did the first part, but then he disappeared. He didn't bring the funds back to the Nazis. He just stayed over there, stayed in Switzerland. And the Gestapo were constantly hounding my mother. Where's your husband? She just said, he's not writing to me. I haven't heard from him. Then shortly after Kristallnacht, in November 1938, arrangements were made for me and my younger sister to be smuggled out of Nazi-occupied Austria and Germany. I was told the purpose of the trip. I was told that I'm leaving Salzburg and go to Switzerland, and that later on my mother would follow. My sister was not told anything, and the explanation was that she would blabber something to somebody on the train. The train ride was at night, and we didn't talk to anybody. We made believe we were sleeping most of the time. We traveled as far as Freiburg, which is a city in the southwestern corner of Germany, close to the Swiss and the French border. And there we were taken to a safe house. A professor at the University of Freiburg offered safe haven for Jews who passed through until they could go on. And anyone not familiar with Nazis might think, oh, this is just a nice, friendly thing. It's a heck of a lot more than that, because not only did he risk his position and his freedom, but also his pension and possibly his family. From there, we met a Swiss woman named Gabi, and all this was arranged by Mr. Falk in Switzerland. The Swiss woman took us close to the crossing of the Rhine, where we were supposed to cross on a pontoon bridge. And she had a forged passport with her, which showed her as the mother and my sister and I as her children. A German soldier stopped us all. And he said to her, "Who are these children?" And she said, "They're my children. Here's a passport." He said, "No, they're not. They're the Friedmans from Salzburg, because I know them, and I was stationed there." And then he did something very heroic. He put his life on the line because he told us where to cross. If he had been caught, he would have been executed on the spot. No trial, nothing. Because that's a major offense for a German Wehrmacht officer, soldier. My sister and I would have gotten a long ride to a camp in the east. But I think this was one of the first brave people I met. After that, my mother, living alone in Salzburg, received constant threats from the SS, especially one member, the chief of the SS police in Salzburg. His name, Ado Begos. Anyone familiar with the Nuremberg trials? He was on war criminal list number 2. He was responsible for the murder of the Austrian Chancellor Dollfuss in 1934. Best I could find out from my reading is that Otto Begos disappeared. They can't find him. They never found him. I would assume he's in one of those 3 or 4 countries around the world that are harboring Nazis. Those countries are in the southern tip of Africa and 2 countries in South America. My mother's escape in 1939 was with the help of another brave person, Paul Grüninger, the chief of police of St. Gallen, which is a city near the German border, near Lake Constance. This man saved hundreds of Jews, and his explanation was he could not obey an inhuman order. And he was eventually arrested by the Swiss. Oh, he got my mother out, I should say. He was eventually arrested by the Swiss, and he was convicted in 1940. In 1995, he was exonerated. In the meantime, the family lost all pension benefits. I want to show you how far Switzerland has come since then. You know, until recently, many of the cantons in Switzerland did not permit a woman to vote. That changed I would say, last 15 years. And Switzerland is governed by a presidential council of 7 members. They rotate the presidency 1 every year. And all of a sudden, a woman was elected to that council. You might have heard of her, Ruth Dreyfus, the first Jewish president of Switzerland. On the subject of Switzerland, they were of great help during the Nazi regime, too. They complained that they couldn't tell who was Jewish by looking at a German passport. And they suggested to the Nazis, why don't you stamp a letter J into all the passports so we know, so we don't turn any non-Jews back at the border. Now I'd like to talk about my grandmothers. My parents never wanted to talk about my 2 grandmothers. I decided the only way I'm going to find out is do my own research. I went to Vienna. In the old city hall, they had all the Gestapo files. And some of the volunteers working there was some church group or other, Austrians. They showed me how to look up files, how to find things. And the Germans were great record keepers. They kept exact details. I found the name of my maternal grandmother, and it said that she died a natural death in Vienna. And then I looked for my paternal grandmother, and it said that she was arrested, taken to Theresienstadt, and executed. And the records showed the exact date of arrest, date of arrival, date of execution. It was very shaking to read that. I wanted this verified, and I met someone who worked for the European Bureau of Yad Vashem, and he verified it for me. He got me a copy of the document. After that, we just had to go to Theresienstadt to see the site. Also, my granddaughter was studying at Charles University for one semester in Prague on an exchange program, and she took a course on the Holocaust, which was taught by one of the survivors. And she told her professor about the grandmother who died in Theresienstadt. So he took my granddaughter and also her mother to Theresienstadt and to see the site. One of the things I enjoy the most now as being a consul, it gives me a chance to talk to many groups, both here and in Austria. I also help survivors of the Holocaust improve their benefits and get higher benefits if there's a disability involved. In 2002, I received an invitation from Braunau in Austria. Many of you know what Braunau represents. It was the birthplace of Hitler. Now, it's a center of the study of racism, anti-Semitism, fascism, and undemocratic activities. They had a meeting of historians there, and I accepted the invitation. And I asked them, what can I do for your group when I come to Braunau? They said, make a brief address, and then we're going to have about 70 young people in the audience who are going to ask you questions. Answer their questions best you can. As long as we talked about the 1930s, everything was very smooth. But when I came into the more recent world history, I was attacked as coming from a country of warmongers. I said, you men, you all know contemporary history. Let's turn back to 1934, when Hitler violated the Versailles Treaty and marched into the Rhineland. Did any nation in the world lift a finger? What did the good President of the United States do? What did the good people in France, England? Nobody said anything. Hitler was only testing. He knew if he gets away with the Rhineland, Austria will be next, then Sudetenland, then Czechoslovakia. Afterwards, the leader, or the most flaming speaker, came up to me and he said, you made me think. I said, thank you. That's all I'm trying to do. There is a very good project going on in Austria. It's not publicized at all in this country. It's called Letters to the Stars. 60,000 young Austrian children each wrote a letter to one of the Holocaust victims from Austria. This was co-sponsored by the religious leaders of Austria, union leaders, industry leaders, the chancellor, leading industrialists. And that was Letters to the Scholars #1. That was May last year. This year, they have a follow-up. They want to make contact with survivors. And a little school in St. Johann, which is just south of Salzburg, contacted me, sent me a series of questions, and asked me if I would come to their town, speak to the students, also speak to the adults, meet the community, and spend a few days with them. I said, I'll be very happy, and that's where I'm heading on May 12th, very soon. I'm very grateful for my saviors, but let us learn the lesson of the Holocaust, to fight bigotry and racism and ultranationalism. We must speak up. We can't remain silent. And we must build bridges with different cultures, across generations and across nations. I thank you. And if there are any questions, I'll answer them. No questions. I can answer them privately afterwards, too. I didn't know him. He recognized me. I thought that was the most courageous thing any person ever did for me. Because it would have, if somebody observed him or caught us afterwards, that would have been his immediate end. I would have had a few days or weeks or months.
What year did you come to America? Who sponsored you?
I came in 1941, and there's a family in Liberty that sponsored us, Grossingers. I had an uncle that worked there. He was one of the managers.
How old were you when you crossed over?
I was born in 1926, so 1938, November, I was 12 years old. My sister was 8 at the time.
The sister that was with the nuns, what happened to her?
Pardon me?
The sister that stayed with the nuns.
She didn't stay with them. She only attended classes for a few weeks. She's in New Jersey now. Yes. He was the first one to get out because of the special business visa where he was going to collect the receivables. He had to get visa for every country he went into, but he was able to collect the money. And I'm very much interested in finding out what happened to this man in Switzerland. I recently asked the Swiss consul for assistance in locating him. And if that doesn't work, I'll do some of my own investigation there.
When you came here, were you able to speak English, or did you have to learn that, and then where did you go to school?
Okay, I was able to speak English. I learned it in a school in France. I attended school in France in 2 years, for 2 years. By the way, my father was imprisoned in France. The French imprisoned all males over 18. They put them all in the same camp. Jewish refugees and Nazis together. And this camp was located way up in the Pyrenees Mountains, And my father survived it all right. And while he was there, he decided to write his life's history, addressing it to his children, not to be released until after his death. And I've turned over the original to Leo Beck Institute and also a copy to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And I guess it's important to have a family history, something to tell the future generations what happened. The officer, no, I didn't know his name. I like to find out what happened to him. I was also, one of my classmates started looking for me. A classmate from Salzburg. He went to the Israeli embassy in Vienna and gave him my name and place of birth, and they said, no, we have no record of Fred Friedman. But they told him, why don't you go to the Jewish Community Center in Salzburg, which he did, and the head of that community center and synagogue said, oh yes, I know Fred, he was here 2 months ago, here's his address. And then we got in touch. I also wanted to meet other classmates. He said, you don't want to meet the others. I said, why not? He said, there's some Nazis in that class. They had an open meeting, we had a reunion in Salzburg of the survivors. This was in 1993. They advertised all over the world. We had a lot of help from the Salzburg state government, the city of Salzburg, and the Jewish community. And we organized this meeting. And they came from Israel, Holland, United States, Germany, many other countries. My mother at the time was the oldest one. She was born in 1899. She lived to be 101. As I said to her, you lived in 3 centuries. It was a very moving event. We had a lot of press coverage. Also, they had a lot of security. And I was wondering, as we're walking through the park, the 2 guys always following us. I said to one of the guys, who are these guys always behind us? They said they're from the state police for security. They were afraid that there could be some crazies attacked. The synagogue always has an armed guard in Salzburg, which is true in many cities in Europe, by the way. He's there at all times with a submachine gun. When services go on, there are 2 of them. We had an event which was very moving. They invited the people of Salzburg to come to the courtyard of the synagogue and meet the Jews who were left here. And there were some wonderful, moving scenes. Radio and TV reporters were running around filming, recording everything. And I remember one scene. One guy goes up to one of the survivors, one of the local men, quite heavy. He said, I want to apologize now for calling you a Jew pig. And the survivor put his arm around him and he said, all is forgiven. So I think it was a healing for both. The governor made a beautiful address, and we invited some people that we met over the years. I've been dealing with a history professor. head of the history department, the University of Salzburg. I had many interviews with him, and he also came to the States to interview me, and he gave me a series of questions to ask my mother, interviewed that, taped that. Then one day he said, "Let's go visit your home." And I said, "Great." We walk around the house. He's taking a lot of pictures. One guy comes running out of the building. "What are you doing here?" I said, "We're taking pictures." He says, "I can tell that, but why are you taking pictures?" Because in 1938, I was chased out of this house. Immediately, the man's demeanor changed. "I got to talk to you. You come up to my apartment. We're going to serve you cake right now. You come back tomorrow with your wife. You're going to have dinner with us." And this was a local teacher. It was a wonderful experience. So you have a lot of good experiences. No. My father was in the prison camp at the time. And it was kind of difficult in France. The French were not sympathetic to me. They're outright hostile. They had a saying, "Les Allemands sont les Boches et les Autrichiens sont autres chiens." The Germans are Bosch, which is a curse word, and the Austrians are other dogs. I had a close friend in that class. He was out to protect me, and he cooked up a story for me to tell the other boys that my father was away with the French army. That improved the situation a little bit.
In your travels, have you ever worked with Per Under, who was with Ralph Wallenberg?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Haven't met him. I tried to meet Wallenberg. They tried to arrange a meeting, but that's not easy. I visited a lot of sites in the old second district of Vienna, the Jewish district. There's a very big synagogue there, very heavy protection. On the outside, Austrian police guards. On the inside, behind bulletproof glass, Israeli security members. And you don't just walk in. They want to see your passport. They ask you a few questions before they let you in. But I've seen the same thing at the synagogue in Munich and in Florence, too.
What's the current population of the congregation in Strasbourg?
It's about 120. Now, most of them are from East European countries, predominantly Romania and the former Soviet Union. The head of the congregation, Marco Feingold, is the only native Austrian there. He's 90 years old and he's going full steam. I think he's going to be my role model. He has a beautiful villa outside of Salzburg, and I admired the stonework on the steps. And I said, "Who did that?" He said, "I did all the sculpting here." He says, "I have to thank the Nazis for that. They taught me that trade." Recently, on a less happy note, I saw on the internet that an explosive device was discovered right in front of this was maybe a month and a half ago, in front of the synagogue. Feingold was the first one to notice it, smart enough not to touch it. Bomb squad came in and took it away and blew it up. And there was a note attached about what's going to happen to the Jews from now on. So it's still going on. But the future, I think, is in the young people. And I want to concentrate all my efforts to talk to young Austrians. They're doing a great job in Austria training young people. I was in Eisenstadt. The synagogue, Eisenstadt, by the way, was the second largest Jewish community after Vienna for a long time. Now there are just a few families left. And the synagogue is serving also as a museum. I walked into the synagogue and I saw a whole bunch of little kids there. They were all first graders. I said to the teacher, "Can I sit in?" She says, "Sure, you can sit in, but you're not going to get any candies for good answers." They sang Jewish songs, and they had some Jewish delicacies for little kids, and they explained a little bit about the Jewish religion. And then the kids had a chance to talk. And one little boy said, "I'd like to be Jewish." And the teacher said, "Why?" "Oh, it's such nice music." So you got to work on the young ones. You also have to work on the cadets in the police academies and the military officers. In the past, military officers always had a coming out parade on the Victory Place in Vienna before all those statues of generals. But recently they did one in Mauthausen. They wanted to teach them about the less glorious part of Austria. And they got the message. While I was in Mauthausen, visiting Mauthausen, there was a group of young National Police cadets. I followed them. I like to listen in on the comments and what they say. They marched them into a gas chamber, closed the door, and then started lecturing them. And I think that made an impression on those young guys. The important thing is to reach the young people, get the message out to them. The third generation since the war is our hope. The first and the second generation are too far gone. To a certain extent, yes. I think Jews are more comfortable in the smaller towns. One city I'm thinking of is, besides Salzburg, Innsbruck has a very active Jewish community, and so does Linz. Lower Austria, which used to be governed out of Vienna, has its own capital now, which is St. Pölten, and there's a large national museum dedicated to the Jewish history of Austria. Well, any questions? I'll answer them privately afterwards. Thank you.
Split
Es brennt. It's a Holocaust song written by Mordechai Gebertig in 1936. In English, it's entitled It Burns. In October 1940, Mordechai and his family were sent to a subcamp of Auschwitz. He was shot by the Germans on Bloody Thursday, June 4th, 1942. Es brennt was sung in the ghettos and camps by the victims of the Holocaust. I would like at this time to introduce our rabbi, Rabbi Alan Podet. Rabbi Podet has a distinguished career as a professor of philosophy and religious studies at Buffalo State College. A native of Cleveland, Ohio, he is a member of the United States Naval Reserve, and served as a naval chaplain. He was founding rabbi of Temple Sinai in Bellevue, Washington, and was rabbi at Temple Israel in Dayton, Ohio, and B'nai Israel in Olean, New York. In 2001, Rabbi Podet was chosen as founding rector of the first rabbinical seminary on the continent of Europe since World War II, which was established in Potsdam, Germany, at the Abraham Geiger College. He was chosen to train rabbis and to help an historic Jewish community renew its spirit, which Hitler had sought to destroy. Rabbi Podet and his wife Valerie Jill spent an entire year in Potsdam and returned as our rabbi in 2002. Rabbi.
63 years ago, our fathers and brothers answered the call to put down bigotry and violence, hate and destruction. Now, it seems that our sons and our daughters are answering the same call. This evening has special significance to me, not only because I've had a chance to meet and talk with you, Fred. I'm scheduled to teach a course at Buffalo State College in Holocaust, part of religious studies, philosophy and religious studies. I suppose I could teach the course every year. There's enough interest from the students, very, very few of whom are Jewish, by the way. However, I can't teach that course every year. Kids ask me sometimes, you know, they heard about it last year, or can they take it next year? And I said, yeah, I'm not going to teach it. I can't teach that course more often than once in 3 years, and I have to steel myself to do that. There are guest speakers, at least one per year, that I bring in. There's one that Fred and I know, a gentleman that we know in common, Saul Messenger. He was on the SS St. Louis, the ship of doom, the ship that was turned away from the United States, among other places. He was a child. He survived. It's not so easy for Saul. It's not so easy for Saul to teach in that course either, to give a guest lectureship. I used him last time. I think I'm going to use somebody else this time. I have an idea. You asked for questions, there'll be another question. Yes, we got the call. We got the call. I don't know why. I've been to Germany now about 27 times, always at their expense. The Federal Republic has found it useful to bring me over there to give lectures in my zerbrochene Deutsch, in my broken German. I don't speak German. I speak Yiddish with a German accent. And I have lectured to universities and colleges up and down the country, everywhere. as part of the program of the Federal Republic and other agencies that they control and subsidize, so I guess I was fairly well known. They called me and they asked me, they said they have reached the point that they want to found a liberal seminary for the training of rabbis for Germany, Austria, and German-speaking Switzerland. Mainly Germany. The money's German. And would I come and do that? Well, I talked to my wife, Valerie Jill, and I kind of talked her into it. I'm not sure she was absolutely convinced. But, okay, I am the Lord and Master in my home. Seems to be some strange reaction here. Anyway, I make all the decisions in our home. And so we determined that we would leave and we would do it. However, I asked them, I want to go, I want to do this, but I would rather not wind up subsidizing the school. Can you tell me what the arrangements would be? I got a telegram back saying, don't worry, it'll all be arranged. On Valerie's suggestion, I wrote back and I said, I understand it'll all be arranged. I wouldn't mind seeing something with a letterhead and somebody's signature on it and some numbers. And I got the answer back, don't worry, everything will be well organized. At this point, I was thinking of how I was going to write back, and Valerie said, what are you kidding yourself? You're going to do it anyway, no matter what the circumstances. Tell them you're coming. So I went. We went. The cooperation I received from the German government and from all the agencies with whom we dealt, just phenomenal. I can't stress it enough. The interest was really there. The helpfulness, the hope was really there. The knowledge was really there. I remember one of my early trips to Germany. I was staying with a minister, a Christian minister. His daughter was a high school age kid. Said, why don't you come to our concert? We're having a concert. And I said, well, yeah, right. High school concert, I'm sure. Well, she said, no, there'll be some interesting Jewish music there. And I said, Jewish music? Oh, all right, why not? I want to be kind to her. I'm staying with her parents. I was moved to tears by the beauty of the Yiddish music that these kids had sung. They had developed a choir dedicated to Jewish music, particularly to Yiddish Jewish music, all right? Not Hava Nagila, Yiddish music. They sang it with all the correct intonation, every krecht's in place. And they told me that they did this 4 times a year, and they had raised enough money to do this, to take the whole group to Israel, where they had sung in Tel Aviv to enormously positive reaction. Who couldn't be positive? They're kids, And I was thinking, I have known for many years that God is a joker. It's true. Sets up these situations for his amusement. Tevye was right about that. Here I am, a rabbi sitting in Germany, listening to a bunch of Germans singing Yiddish songs to the point where it's almost so beautiful as to be tearful. I had to come to Germany to hear this because I'm not going to hear it in America. Amazing, just amazing. So I was not totally surprised at the very positive reaction, positive response that I got. I only went there on a 1-year agreement because I didn't want to leave it open-ended, and Valerie insisted that we keep our options open. 1 year. Got permission from the congregation. We went. And we were able, within 1 year, of course, they were prepared for us. They really were. They weren't lying about that. We were able, within 1 year, to set up the basic program of an entire seminary for the production of rabbis. Our first class, out of 17 applicants, we took 4 students. It's always easy to go down in quality. It's not so easy to go up. So you better be careful when you start high. We took 4 out of 17 students in the first class. We did about the same in the second class. We are now pushing into the third class, and it's a 5-year program. 2 years from now, we're going to have rabbis in the field that we have produced. There are 100,000 Jews in Germany. There are another 100,000 Jews in Eastern Europe, let alone France, which you can let alone. And other areas of Europe, but we will be able to serve these people. And the need is seriously there. We will also be able to provide not only Germany or Austria, Switzerland, but also Eastern Europe. We'll be able to do that. It has been a marvelous experience. I considered the possibility even of staying a second year, but I wouldn't do that to the congregation. I might have if I got permission, but from the university I could stay away an extra year. What do they know? But this group is a little bit different. Fred mentioned that there are often tanks, well, they're really armored personnel carriers, in front of many of the synagogues. That's true. In the major synagogue, Oranienburger Straße, in Berlin, now that's the one that towers over the street, an enormous thing. There isn't a cathedral in Buffalo, certainly, that's of that magnitude. It was spared because it was locked in between other buildings. They were afraid if they torched this, they're going to burn down the block. So it survived somehow. Today, it's still in use as a synagogue. It's mostly a museum, but areas of it are still in use as a synagogue. And there is a panzer, an armored vehicle, a tank, out in front of the place. Valerie, of course, the family pacifist, one day she comes there and the thing was missing. The police, of course, were there. And she goes up to the chief policeman and says, "Wo ist unser Panzer? What have you done with our tank?" The guy didn't know what to make of her. Not the first. From then on, they never played with us again. That tank was there every Friday. We both of us felt that our German required a little brushing up, and we were enlisted in a class taught, of course, for professional immigrants. And I remember the day when the teacher asked what people thought, exercise in language, what people thought when they came to Germany. I knew this was going to be a mistake. Going around the room, I was just waiting till they got to her. And what did you think when you came to Germany? This one talked about Gemütlichkeit, and that one talked about the beer, and this one is up with the sausages. And she said, "I figured there's a Nazi behind every bush." The teacher was very good. She didn't hit the roof, nothing. She said, "Yes, it's true. Many people come here with that impression. I hope it will change." Well, it changed for me in many ways. It changed for me in many ways. The people that we knew were terrific, just terrific. One of the experiences that I carried back was much of the reporting that we got from the American press was so strange that I was wondering what planet they were writing about. For example, they reported, well, there's a paper called the New York Herald Tribune. There is no New York Herald Tribune. What it is, it's the European edition of the New York Times and the Washington Post. They pull articles from one and the other, put it together, and that's for the European crowd, for the Americans in Europe. In the New York Herald Tribune, there's this article about thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinians marching in Berlin against Israel, against the Jews, against anything. I was there. If they had 1,500 people, it was a lot. I don't think they had that many. Now, I'm reading in the paper about these thousands and thousands. I don't know. It's very difficult to trust the reporting. Excuse me for people who are dealing with the press. It's very difficult to trust the reporting. The many attacks and riots against the Jews, one girl being viciously attacked, I happen to know the story. This kid, she must have been about 17 something, goes to a Palestinian meeting wearing a big Magen David Jewish star on a necklace around her neck. Some jerk, some yutz, rips the necklace off, and that was the riot that was reported in the Herald Tribune. I must tell you to be suspicious of these reports. I will tell you that the cooperation that we did receive, and I'm speaking from personal experience, was extremely impressive, extremely impressive. The sensitivity to the history, the sensitivity to the disaster that overcame not only the Jews, but the Germans themselves because of the Nazi period, is not to be underestimated. I had thought about spending a little bit more time there. The critical moment in my thinking was when we were standing outside of what is probably the Kempinski Hotel. It's probably the finest hotel in West Germany. When we first came there, they put us up at the Kempinski Hotel. Beautiful, magnificent place. I didn't realize it was at our expense. Actually, later on when we were leaving the country, they said, "Oh, you could have submitted a bill." Yeah, as we were getting on the plane, they told us. We're standing outside the place, and I'm looking up, and she's looking up, and we see there's this bronze plaque on the wall about the Kempinski family. And it says, you know, there, on this spot, the Kempinski family erected this wonderful, magnificent hotel. Tragically, they were driven out of Germany in such and such a year. The family had a forced sale and a whole business. And this is put up to memorialize the family and to remember who they were and so on. Valerie turns to me and she says, first they kill them, and now they put up a plaque to remember them. She says, "Alan, I don't want to stay in this country." I said to her, "Valerie, that has got to be the most unfair remark you've made in the last half hour. These people have been nothing but wonderful to us. The minister of education, everybody from the vice president of the parliament on down has been nothing but welcoming and helpful to us." And then I realized you're talking to a woman about an emotional issue, and you're using logic. You're flapping your gums. Forget about it. It is not going to work. So we bought the ticket, and that was it. Came back. I must say that in responding to one thing that Fred said, I cannot speak for the German military, although I did institute a program to train chaplains for the Wehrmacht. We will be having Jewish chaplains serving in the German military institution. I would have preferred the Navy, of course, but okay, let it be the Army. Like American naval chaplains, they are going to have to serve everybody. But I want the chaplains to be there so that people in the Wehrmacht learn that in a country which has very few Jews, proportionally speaking, they should learn what it means to deal with a Jewish officer. The military in this country is altogether different. My experience as 29 years in the Navy, my experience in this country has been that the attitude of the military in this country toward Jews is extremely supportive. I must say, particularly in regard to the Middle East, every time we send another 100 troops over to Saudi Arabia, or any of the lands over there, they come back being extremely pro-Jewish. That's one of the things that our Arab friends do for us over there, is they create Zionists out of all the military people that we send over there. Very seriously speaking, we still have a long way to go in this country. At the present time, just before I came down here for this weekend, I read an email release by Alan Dershowitz, regarding Mr. Alan Dershowitz, who is a professor of law at Harvard University. It seems that Mr. Dershowitz, or that Professor Dershowitz, excuse me, Dr. Dershowitz, gave a speech about various things, I think, about not particularly the Middle East, but about the role of law in religion. This was in Boston at Faneuil Hall, which is one of the foundation stones, locations of American democracy. Speech pretty much had to be canceled because some PLO people showed up and threatened him. Well, PLO people and others, young people mostly, young left people, showed up and threatened him with violence, hatred and violence, to the point where not only was the speech canceled, but the police had to come in and surround him to protect him. They stopped him from interacting at all, even answering any questions, hustled him to his car, and an officer got in with him for the first 2 or 3 blocks, then the guy got out. Dershowitz, who has encountered anti-Semitism before, was absolutely shocked that this would happen at all, that this would happen in America, that this would happen in Boston, the alleged cradle of freedom, outside of Faneuil Hall. The end of the story is the worst part, which is that this story, like many stories of a similar nature, somehow has managed not to be reported in the mainstream media. The sinister implication of that should not be lost upon us. It is necessary to continue vigilance because we are a very long way from being out of the woods as regards race hate in general and anti-Semitism in particular. Mr. Justice Jackson once wrote, in the case of West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett in 1943, these words: "Those who begin coercive elimination of dissent soon find themselves exterminating dissenters. Compulsory unification of opinion achieves only the unanimity of the graveyard."
Stephen Shulman will now read the 103rd Psalm, verses 13 through 19.
As a father has compassion for his children, so the Lord has compassion for those who fear him. For he knows how we are formed. He is mindful that we are dust. Man, his days are like those of grass. He blooms like a flower of the field. A wind passes by, and it is no more. Its own place no longer knows it. But the Lord's steadfast love is for all eternity toward those who fear him, and his beneficence is for the children's children of those who keep his covenant and remember to observe his precepts. The Lord has established his throne in heaven, and his sovereign rule is over all.
I now ask that Barbara Swartz come to the podium to lead in the candle lighting service.
As we briefly lay aside the problems confronting our nation today to memorialize the supreme tragedy of more than 59 years ago, we now will take a few moments to commemorate our fallen brothers and sisters by lighting a candle in their memory. 6 candles for the 6 million. When we try to remember 6 million, we are doomed to fail. It is an overpowering abstraction. The candle helps us to break it down to human size. The candles silently tell us that in the 6 million, there were mothers and fathers, and sisters and brothers, and grandmothers and grandfathers, and aunts and uncles, and cousins, and cherished friends, individuals who loved and who were loved. We kindle the first light for the countenance of an old man and for the mother with her shawl, embracing her infant tightly. For the young girl with her braids, carrying priceless treasures of a potato or crumb in her hand, and the small children, pure in heart, with open eyes. For the terror-stricken families hiding in ghetto cellars, as the sun dared to shine in the bright blue sky. For the endless lines of quiet men and women on their way to mass graves, reciting the Kaddish, the prayer for the dead, over themselves. For teachers and their pupils, rabbis and their followers. For the liberators and resistance groups, the heroes of Warsaw, the martyrs of Treblinka, the victims of Auschwitz. And we light a seventh candle, a candle of hope, for the vulnerability and value of a human life, the terrible price paid for bigotry and hatred, and for indifference and silence.
On this evening, we gather and tell the story in memory of the 6 million who chose life, but their lives were taken. In memory of the 6 million who perished, the memory of every man, woman, and child, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. They chose life, defying those who were seeking their death. In honor of the dead, in honor of the survivors, in honor of the perished, in honor of the saved, in honor of those who survived the camps, and of those who were not reached by the evil spirit, in honor of each man, woman, and child who were marked for the final solution, in honor of every man, woman, and child who continue the chain of generations, and in honor of the generations to come, in the name of them, all we now say, the people of Israel lives on.
Bruce Lahr will read the first ones from the Lament of the Martyred Jewish People.
The first ones to be destroyed were the children, little orphans abandoned upon the face of the earth. They who were the best in the world, the acme of grace on the dark earth. O tender orphans, from them the bereaved of the world, in a house of shelter we drew consolation. From the mournful faces, mute and dark, we said, the light of day will yet break upon us. Thus it was at the end of the winter 42, in such a poor house of shelter, I saw children just gathered from the street, and I hid in a corner of corners. I saw in the embrace of a nurse a little girl less than 2 years old, emaciated, thin, her face the pallor of death, and her eyes so grave, so serious. And I looked at her. I looked at this 2-year-old crone. Like a grandma of 100 years was this little girl in Israel. The trouble and misery that her grandma had not seen, even in a nightmare, this little girl had seen fully awake. And I wept and said to myself, away with the tears. The sorrow will cease, but the graveness will remain. The graveness will remain. It will seep into the well of the world, and the well of life, and deepen it. This Jewish earnestness will awaken, will open the eyes of the blind, will shine like the Torah to the whole world, like a prophecy, like holy scriptures. Do not cry, do not weep. 80 million murderers will atone for one worried child in Israel. Do not cry. At this station, another girl I saw, about 5 years old. She fed her younger brother, and he cried. The little one, he was sick. Into a diluted bit of jam she dipped tiny crusts of bread, and skillfully she inserted them into his mouth. This my eyes were privileged to see. To see this mother, a mother of 5 years feeding her child, to hear her soothing words. My own mother, the best in the whole world, had not invented such a ruse. But this one wiped his tears with a smile, injected joy into his heart. A little girl in Israel, Shalom Aleichem, could not have improved upon her. They, the children of Israel, were the first in doom and disaster. Most of them, without father and mother, were consumed by frost, starvation, and lice. Holy Messiahs sanctified in pain. Say then, how have these lambs sinned? Why in days of doom are they the first victims of wickedness? The first in the trap of evil are they. The first were they detained for death, the first into the wagons of slaughter. They were thrown into the wagons, the huge wagons, like heaps of refuse, like the ashes of the earth. And they transported them, killed them, exterminated them, without remnant of remembrance. The best of my children were all wiped out. Oh, woe unto me, doom and desolation. From Lament of the Martyred Jewish People, Yitzhak Katzen Nelson.
From the Diary of Anne Frank by Vicki Parks.
Dear Kitty, for in its innermost depths, youth is lonelier than old age. I read this saying in some book, and I've always remembered it and found it to be true. Is it true, then, that grown-ups have a more difficult time here than we do? I know it isn't. Older people have formed their opinions about everything and don't waver before they act. It's twice as hard for us young ones to hold our ground and maintain our opinions in a time when all ideals are being shattered and destroyed, when people are showing their worst side and do not know whether to believe in truth and right and God. Anyone who claims that the older ones have a more difficult time here certainly don't realize to what extent our problems weigh down on us, problems for which we are probably much too young, but which thrust themselves upon us continually until, after a long time, we think we found a solution, but the solution doesn't seem able to resist the facts which reduce it to nothing again. That's the difficulty in these times. Ideals, dreams, and cherished hopes rise within us only to meet the horrible truth and be shattered. It's really a wonder that I haven't dropped all my ideals because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yet I keep them because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I simply can't build up my hopes on a foundation consisting of confusion, misery, and death. I see the world gradually being turned into a wilderness. I hear the ever-approaching thunder, which will destroy us too. I can feel the sufferings of millions, and yet, if I look up into the heavens, I think that it will all come out right, and this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. In the meantime, I must uphold my ideals, for perhaps the time will come when I shall be able to carry them out. Yours, Anne.
In the last reading, Dr. Dan Glatzer, the last wish of my life has been granted.
This letter was written by Mordechai Anilewitz, the commander of the Warsaw Ghetto, on April 23, 1943, in the middle of the revolt. It was a last call for help from the dying ghetto to the outside world. Now it is clear that everything that has happened is far graver than we had anticipated. We did more than we couldn't resist in the Germans, but our strength is being exhausted. We are on the threshold of oblivion. Twice, we forced the Germans to retreat, but they have returned in greater force. One of our groups held out for 40 minutes. Another one fought for 6 hours. The mine we planted in the area of the bridge factory has exploded. Then we attacked the Germans and inflicted heavy casualties while our losses were only slight. This, too, is an achievement. Zee felt at his machine gun. I feel that we have dared to do great things which have enormous value. Of necessity, we are changing our taxes today to partisan methods. Tonight, 6 patrols are going out to accomplish 2 tasks: reconnaissance and capture of arms. Remember, short-range weapons are of no use to us. We use such weapons only rarely. We need a lot of rifles, grenades, machine guns, and explosives. I can't describe to you the conditions in which the Jews of the ghetto now live. Only a few could possibly withstand such suffering. The rest will die sooner or later. Their fate is sealed. For although thousands are hiding in nooks and rat holes, there's not enough air in those places to light a candle. You who are outside are blessed. Perhaps we shall see each other by some miracle. This is very doubtful. The last aspiration of my life has been fulfilled. Jewish fighting, resistance is a fact. Jewish self-defense and Jewish revenge are a reality. I am happy and content that I have been among the first fighters of the ghetto. whence will salvation come?
Practically the last element in the Jewish service is the recitation of the Kaddish, which is not a prayer for the dead, but it's rather a prayer of the living. It's a doxology in praise of God, generally uttered by those in mourning. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divarach hiryutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chaye chon u'v'yomei chon, u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'gala v'izman kari v'imaru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mavarach le'olam u'la'olmei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei, v'yithadar v'yitale v'yithalal shemei dekudisha barichu, le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, damiran be'alma v'yimaru amen. Yehi shlamar Rabbah min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimaru amen. Oseh shalom b'maromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimaru amen. May the Father of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort all the bereaved among us or wherever they may be. Amen.
We reaffirm the sacredness of life. We will strive to build out of our memories of the Holocaust a world joined by a true fellowship of human understanding, a world of tolerance and diversity in which all peoples can live in dignity and in peace. This concludes tonight's program. Thank you for coming.